Percy and the Engine Gala, written and told by Kiefer Adams. Percy was heading back to Tidmouth Sheds after a long day's work. At the junction, he saw Donald and Douglas. The Scottish twins were excited. "Good evening, Percy," greeted Donald. "Have ye heard the news?" "What news?" Percy asked. "The Engine Gala that starts tomorrow," said Douglas. "An engine gala," said Percy. "What's that?" "The Fat Controller has invited several engines from the other railway," said Donald. "They're quite unique designs, but they'll be doing special demonstrations in the yards," said Douglas. Percy was rather impressed. "Do you think anyone we'll know will be attending?" he asked. "I don't think so," said Donald. "The Fat Controller's already invited them," said Douglas. "But I'm sure there'll be friendly faces when they arrive." Percy wasn't so sure. He headed back to Tidmouth Sheds, wondering long and hard about the Engine Gala. When Percy returned home, it was already dark. Thomas was the only engine outside of Tidmouth Sheds. "Percy," he cried, "what are you doing back so late?" "Sorry, Thomas," said Percy as he backed in beside him. "I was told about the gala today." "Aren't you looking forward to it?" asked Thomas. "Loads of engines from far and wide will be attending." "Yes, I know," said Percy. "But I wish Wilbert was coming too." "Wilbert?" asked Thomas. "Who's Wilbert?" "Wilbert is a saddle tank engine with 6 wheels," explained Percy. "He works on the Dean Forest Railway, but I managed to meet him before I went to the workshops where the Fat Controller brought me from. He taught me everything there was to know about shunting. I miss him a lot. I wish he could come to the gala too. But I doubt he will." Feeling rather put down, Percy reversed into his berth. Thomas sighed. "Maybe there's something I can do," he thought to himself, as he also turned in for the night. The next morning, Toby arrived at the harbour to collect some supplies from Cranky. He was amazed at what greeted him. A sleek, bluish-grey engine stood on the line next to him. "Hello there," he said grandly. "Is this Sir Topham Hatt's railway?" "Yes, it is," replied Toby. "Are you here for the Engine Gala?" "That's right," replied the engine. "Name's Husham." "Well, nice to meet you, Husham," said Toby. "But can I ask, why are you called Husham?" "Well, I'm an experimental hush-hush," Husham explained. "I'm going to be doing passenger runs for the gala." Toby was impressed. "Well, I hope you enjoy yourself," he said. "Thank you," said Husham. He pumped his pistons and set off out of the harbour. Toby was beyond words. "Of all the engines I've seen in my time," he exclaimed, "I've never seen anything like that before." Some of the engines could say the same when the rest of the engines attending the gala began to arrive. The first to arrive was Wilbur. He was a prototype diesel shunter. At first, he wasn't sure of the way, but thanks to Oliver and Toad, he was able to reach the yards where the gala was to take place. While having a washdown, Gordon was startled by the presence of a little battery-operated engine. "All right there, mate. Name's Clifton. Can you tell me the way to the gala, please?" Gordon was so stunned he couldn't even find his voice, but was able to point Clifton in the right direction. Next came a pair of cheeky saddle tank engines named Richie and Eddie, who worked at a power plant in Hammersmith. They were just as bad as Bill and Ben, but they were kind engines and loved a good joke or two. And finally, while James was being cleaned, the smallest tank engine he had ever seen rolled up beside him. His name was Felix, and he had quite the record on the other railway, known as Britain's smallest steam engine. When the shock of Felix's size had died down, James was more than happy to point the little engine in the direction of the gala. Later that day, Percy was making his way to Knapford. He thought that a long afternoon of preparing the other engines' trains was before him. But as he passed the main line, Percy was surprised to find Edward waiting for him in a siding. "Well, there you are, Percy," chuckled Edward. "I have a message from the Fat Controller. We have a latecomer for the gala, and he wants you to take him there personally." "A latecomer?" asked Percy. "But I thought all the engines that were invited were here." "Not this one," said Edward. "Let's just say he was more of a last-minute arrival." Percy didn't know what to make of this, but he thanked Edward for the message and set off to meet the mysterious addition to the gala, wondering who it could be. Percy found the visitor further up the line and couldn't believe his eyes. "Well, you took your time, Percy," the engine chuckled. "Wilbert!" Percy exclaimed as he happily drew up alongside. "What? I don't understand. What are you doing here?" "Your controller invited me to this gala," said Wilbert. "Said something about a request from a little blue tank engine." Percy blushed. "Thank you, Thomas," he whispered happily. "Now then," said Wilbert, "shall we make our way to this gala then?" "Oh, yes, of course," Percy puffed. The two engines made their way to the gala side by side, laughing and chatting for the first time in years. And before long, Wilbert, along with Richie, Eddie, Felix, Clifton, Husham and Wilbur, were having a wonderful time at the gala. All were sorry when it came to an end. Wilbert made a special promise that he would one day return to Sodor, not just to see Percy, but to help out as best he could for the Fat Controller's railway. The engines all hoped that one day another engine gala would be attended, and Percy is looking forward to the day that more wonderful engines from the other railway would be welcomed on North Western Rails.